Thank you for listening to this PodcastOne production. Available on Apple Podcasts and PodcastOne.
The Steve Austin Show is brought to you free today by our friends at BetOnline.ag. As we approach the home stretch of the NFL regular season, the sports betting action continues to stay blazing hot as the competition in the NHL and NBA just keeps getting more intense. Get in the mix at BetOnline.ag and use the promo code PodcastOne for your 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline.ag, your online sportsbook experts and exclusive partner of PodcastOne Sportsnet.
PodcastOne presents Steve Austin Show Classics.
Every week, we are bringing out some of the most requested episodes of the podcast from behind the archives. We have another great one for you this week, and here's my producer, Sean, to tell you all about it.
What's good, everybody? It is producer Sean with another classic episode of the Steve Austin Show, today being episode number 263 with Raven. Original air date, October 13th, 2015. This is one of 3 times that Raven has been on the podcast. Raven has often referred to in many stories of Steve's on the show because back in the WCW days, Raven, Steve Austin, and Brian Pillman used to ride together a lot. Steve dubbed themselves the Comedy Trio because of all the mishaps and shenanigans that would happen on the road. I am a huge fan of Raven's personally. And full disclosure, I used to work on Raven's podcast here at PodcastOne back when it first started. And he's a rad dude and interesting guy, awesome in the ring. And I've always been a big fan of his. So this is actually really cool to go back in a classic episode and present this to you guys. So also, by the way, Raven has a podcast out still on Apple Podcasts and on MLW Radio, known as The Raven Effect, as it always has been. You can check him out along with his co-host, the mighty Joe Feeney, talking about wrestling and many non-wrestling related things on The Raven Effect. Wherever you get your podcasts, you'll definitely dig it. But on this particular episode, Raven and Steve talk about Raven's early memories in pro wrestling, talking about Florida wrestling with Dusty Rhodes, as well as some WWF. Also, Raven talks about the main event style and the main event style of wrestling. And him and Steve really get into that, talking about crowd psychology and just all these little minutia things that Raven finds important to talk about. And if you ever have watched Raven on any pro wrestling shoot interview in the past, he's got so many cool things to say about just the business of pro wrestling and about in-ring psychology and just how the smallest things go such a long way. But Raven and Steve, to talk about Dusty Rhodes, Jerry Lawler, Jake Roberts, and a whole host of other wrestlers and stories that they come up with. Also something that I never quite realized, and I didn't really dive into it, but Raven mentions that Steve and him never wrestled each other. And I find that hard to believe considering they were in promotions together quite frequently at the same time. And they never were paired up with each other. They've had interactions with each other, especially during the Alliance days in 2001. But I don't think they've ever had a match, or at least a televised match with each other that I can recall. But if I'm wrong, I will love to be proven wrong. Anyways, let's get into this day in Steve Austin history. Today being December 19th. We are starting off in 2000 because this time of year is pretty dead and a lot of wrestling stuff is going on, even though a lot of wrestling stuff is going on. So all I have to report today is 2000 in Charlotte, North Carolina at a WWF SmackDown taping. It's WWF European Champion William Regal battling Hardcore Holly to a no contest when special guest referee Steve Austin hit the stunner on both men and began counting them down until Kane came to the ring and hit a chokeslam on Steve Austin. And after the bout, Vince McMahon announced that Steve Austin would face Kane on the subsequent Monday Night Raw. And that is it for this day in Steve Austin history, today being December 19th. I get my information from thehistoryofwwe.com and profightdb.com. And oh, by the way, Steve Austin, our boy, just had a birthday on Wednesday, the day that I'm recording this, but not the day it's released. So if you haven't wished Stone Cold a happy birthday on social media, by all means do so. He would love to hear from you guys. But of course, yes, please rate, review, and subscribe to the Steve Austin Show on Apple Podcasts and anywhere you get the show. And let your friends know about the Steve Austin Show and how great it is. We would all appreciate that here very much. All right, folks, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back with Raven on another classic episode of the Steve Austin Show.
Well, if you can believe it, we're just under a week away from Christmas, which means NFL playoffs and the college football bowl season are upon us. You all know I love my college football, so there's a lot that I'm excited for. Plus, check out what's happening in NFL this weekend. We got the Bills versus the Patriots, the Rams facing the 49ers, the Chiefs up against the Bears, and the Packers taking on the Vikings. Pretty good set of games. Visit our good friends and exclusive partners at PodcastOne, betonline.ag to take advantage of the best bonuses in the business. Sign up today for a free account at betonline.ag and use the promo code PodcastOne. Again, that's betonline.ag, your online sportsbook experts and exclusive partners of PodcastOne Sportsnet.
PodcastOne presents the Steve Austin Show Classics.
This is what happens actually when two guys who were former travel partners and very good friends in the business just get on the phone and talk. And we're going to talk about wrestling. Right. But, you know, when I started going over your career, dude, you lasted, you know, some 30-odd years in the business. I said, you know what? I need a podcast to turn in for Tuesday. Wouldn't do any justice to you or your career to specifically get into, you know, all the great angles that you were in. And I thought we'd skim along the surface of the business and talk about a few issues that were prevalent in the business, things that you went through. And we're not going to go into any heavy detail, but talk a little bit about some drugs. But, dude, where exactly did you grow up? Because right here, you went to the University of Delaware. I never knew. Did you get a degree?
Yeah. I got a criminal justice degree, and then I took a semester off of college to go into the Marine Corps. And then I went back to college, and instead of being an officer, because I didn't want to have to, because then I have to do active duty, which I didn't want to do. I just wanted to go to boot camp and see how tough I was. So after boot camp, I went to infantry school, and then I went back to college in the fall, and then I just had to do 6 years of reserve duty, basically.
Dude, what were you going to do with a criminal justice major?
I was going to be in the FBI, the DEA, the CIA, I don't know.
But somewhere along the way, you got sidetracked in the wonderful world of professional wrestling. When did you first start watching the business? Because, I mean, you and me used to travel together back in our WCW days, and we called ourselves the Comedy Trio because it was yourself, me, and the one and only Flying Brian Pillman, plagued by bad service wherever we went, to all the restaurants we went to, renting those Chevy Lumina vans, and we had the times of our life. But going back to your early days, I started watching in Texas at 7, 8 years of age, and I bought in. It was real to me. Tell me how you were introduced into the business and what to you said, because you're one of the smartest guys that was in the business that I consider, up there with Cactus Jack. I always enjoyed Mick Foley's opinions on stuff. But when did you first start watching the business, and when did you fall in love with it?
As long as I can remember. I mean, you know, when I grew up in Philadelphia until I was about 9. So I remember, you know, so I was there. So what was that? In the early 70s. When Chief Jay Strongbow was at his peak, and I remember Sonny King was a babyface, which, like, then I'd never heard of, like, him again anywhere else, hardly, except then I turned out to be, like, a heel manager later on. He was, like, a big black guy, but he wore, like, a loincloth and as a babyface, and what else? The Fuji and Tanaka were the tag team champions. They're always, you know, in their running, whatever. You know, I think when I thought it was real when I was about, you know, 6, 7, and then I was disabused of that notion, and pretty soon came, you know, it's kind of how I figured out there was no, Santa Claus wasn't real, which is actually kind of a silly story, but, you know, so one day I go to my mom, I go, reindeers can't fly, can they? And because I figured that reindeers can't fly, that Santa Claus must be a fake. Like, it wasn't that he could deliver packages all night all over the world and get everybody right, you know, and just get it done. You know, and it wasn't the fact that he lived in the, you know, the North Pole, like, you know, had a house on the pole. with reindeer, and and one reindeer had a blinky red nose, and I mean there was more holes in that story than Swiss cheese, but the thing that tipped it for me was the reindeer couldn't fly. I was like, yeah, reindeer can't fly, so I'm not buying this nonsense.
Got to tap out on the gimmick. That was always interesting because you bought into the fact that Santa Claus could indeed deliver all these packages down all these chimneys. And we only had one house that had a chimney, but you couldn't get FedEx, UPS, and all the other gimmick package delivery services on a page to deliver all that stuff. It was
back then.
I know, but it was a novel idea.
Yeah, I'm saying, but they didn't even have that. So I couldn't even think that. Well, maybe FedExes them to everybody, and they just, and the post office plays along, and it's like that didn't factor into my theory.
But did y'all ever do the gimmick where make some chocolate chip cookies or whatever, and then put the gimmick glass in the milk in there, and of course somehow, some way, like either one or all of the cookies were eaten or a bite was taken out of them, some of the milk was drunk, and then I was like, man, Santa Claus stopped by, man.
Well, that explained why he was so fat, because he had to eat a bite of cookies, man.
But you got to figure, as somewhere along the way, he would have come across one of the boys, and they would have gimmicked up the chocolate chip cookies with X-Lax, and then it could have made for a real interesting story. I mean, he could have been flying over, Hoboken, New Jersey, taking off from your place, and like a crippled goose.
Absolutely, yeah.
So at what point did you decide to say, man, I'm going to go to wrestling school?
It's a really silly story, but
dude, that's all I got time for is silly stories. That's what a podcast is.
I realized that. Well, actually, I also considered going to law school, but I realized that I really had no interest. Like, I never had to study in high school. Yeah, you get to college, and all of a sudden, you go from I was seventh in my class in high school, and that was without studying, and then now I got to go to college, and all of a sudden now I got to study just to get B's and C's. You know what I mean? Well, not study. I barely study to get B's and C's.
Right.
If I would have worked at it, I could have got A's, but that wasn't happening. And so, so I was like, man, I'm not going to law school. This isn't for me. And so I had always loved wrestling, and it was just like, I don't know. I mean, I just figured I want to do it before I'm 50. I don't want to be 50 years old, but I'm 51 now. But I didn't want to be 51 years old going, man, I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have tried, man. And so I figured I'm better off trying and failing. Well, not failing, trying and being unsuccessful than not trying at all. And because the guy who sits on the couch is the failure,
Right.
The guy, if you try and you're unsuccessful, you're just unsuccessful. But it doesn't make you a failure, because to me,
you had the guts to try.
People, I've always told guys, I've always had a flock or a crew of people or whatever, and I've always told them, I said, look, I don't care. Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to look back at my life as going, man, what did I do with it? Here was an avenue I really wanted to explore, but I was too scared to try. I didn't want to be that guy. I mean, that's also why I went in the Marine Corps. I wanted to see how tough I was. It's like, you want to know that you're, I'm not the toughest guy in the world by any stretch of imagination, but, you want to know that if the world's coming to an end, you can defend yourself and your family. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, you were. Let me step in here. You were tough enough to make it through boot camp, and so you went through the reserve duty. But and proving that you could go through boot camp, it showed some level of toughness. Did that validate you as a person? What did you think about that?
That's a whole long. There's so much more to that story. I was saving that for my book, but which I'm going to write. I got about 5 pages done. I've been working on it for 17 years. No. But yeah, there was a lot of reasons why I felt like I needed to validate myself, but career-wise, I wanted to be fulfilled, and I always loved wrestling. I remember when I was a kid one time, me and my buddy were wrestling, and when we were like 7 years old, and I put him in an arm bar, in a hammerlock. And then all of a sudden he was crying. Like, because kids aren't going to, tap to each other, or stop. All of a sudden he starts crying, and then he was all mad at me. And I was like, man, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to, do whatever, and counter it or something. I didn't know. But I wanted to give it a shot, and I figured, look, if I'm unsuccessful, I'm unsuccessful. But I also made sure that when I left, by then after living in Philadelphia, I moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin for a year. So I saw the AWA, and which I got a funny little story about Dusty as a fan. And then within a year later, we moved to Florida, and when I was 12. And so I grew up in West Palm Beach, in my high school years. And so we watched Florida Championship Wrestling, which was just awesome. Just a really great wrestling show. But I was when I was in Milwaukee, Dusty Rhodes was a heel. He was a bad guy.
Yeah.
Him and I guess Dick Murdoch were tag partners. And but he was flying back and forth. So within 3 months or 6 months, he's in Florida as a babyface. So I moved to Florida, and we lived like 2/3 of a mile from the West Palm Beach Auditorium, and so all the local kids would walk to the auditorium every Monday night. Because they had it every Monday night there, and and it was like $3 a ticket. But if the world champion was there, it was 50 cents more because championship prices were in effect.
I love it.
So everybody's like, man, there's this guy Dusty Rhodes, you'll love him. I'm like, I don't like him at all. He sucks. 11-year-old kid, like this. They were like, blowing them, and I'm just, I'm just like, man, you guys are stupid. You don't know anything. He's a bad guy. And then like 2 weeks later, I'm like, I love it.
What was it about Dusty that because one time when I've told the story many times, but I'll tell you again. I was 7 or 8 and we were living in Edna, Texas, and I was watching wrestling, and it was Sam Houston Coliseum, and someone, I can't remember, had Dusty Rhodes in Iron Claw, and Dusty was bleeding like hell, and a security guard was strolling real slowly around the ring, and the lights were turned down pretty low, old school effects, and he had
they just had the lights over the ring. Yeah.
Oh yeah, dude. Back when the atmosphere was killer. So anyway, I look at my mom. She's reading her book, and the security guard actually has a firearm on his hip. And I said, Mom, why didn't the security guard help Dusty? Because boy, I thought it was a shoot. So, but Dusty, and tomorrow night, I'm going to host or do the Q&A thing for the Jake the Snake Resurrection of Jake the Snake thing here in Culver City. But Jake was the reason I got into wrestling. Dusty was the reason I got into wrestling. Flair was too. What was it about Dusty that captured you? Because I liked his moves. And this was me as a young kid. At the time, I wasn't able to appreciate the words in his promos. I appreciated the lisp and the cadence, and they almost hypnotized me on an audio level.
The cadence, absolutely. It was the lisp and the cadence, and the body language that he did with it. But just the fact that you use those terms is part of the reason why you're the Stone Cold Steve Austin and not Joe Jabroni, with a podcast with 8 people, because you want, like, to me, it's amazing, not to change the subject, but it's amazing, like, guys will go through this business and they'll work on this moves. And I'll give you an exact example. Elix Skipper's a great kid. I really like him. And he did the single most amazing move in the history of wrestling, in my opinion. The TNA, they actually had like a 10 or 12 foot cage or 15 foot cage. They had like a really super high cage. And he and Daniels and somebody else were sitting on the top of it fighting, and he actually walked the top, like the Undertaker walks, the top rope. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He walked the top of the cage, but there's nobody holding his hand. Walked the top of the cage, and then Frankensteinered Daniels or somebody off the top of the cage. But nobody heard about it. Nobody cares about it. It's not a thing anybody talks about. Greatest move, and I've never seen. I don't think it's possible to beat that without seriously taking a chance of screwing yourself over. You know what I mean?
Right.
But have you ever seen that move?
No. Who was doing this?
You have to. Elix Skipper did it.
No.
The cage had to be the cage legitimately had to be what are these short ones? 8 foot, 10 foot. So it had to be 15 foot. And he's standing on top, so his head, where his eyes are, is like 20 foot up. And he climbed up in the corner, and then Daniels and them had shimmied out to the center, and whoever he was punching with, I guess. So Elix walked on, like a balance beam, walked the top of the cage, and then Frankensteiner, I think both of them, or at least one of them off the top. And of course, it wasn't the finish or anything. Why would it be?
Yeah, but is the point you're trying to make the way Dusty talked and moved and captivated the crowd?
My point. Let me come back to it. So my point being is that Elix all the time would work on his moves. I'm like, dude, that if you have 5 good moves, that's all you need. I consider sitting in the corner one of my moves.
Yeah,
you don't need that many moves. What you need is to develop a persona, a character. And it's like, if he would have been, if he could have developed or would have developed a personality to match his athleticism, wow, unbelievable. I mean, he could have been Rey Mysterio before Rey Mysterio, but, you know what I'm saying? He could have been the small guy I guess it was after Rey Mysterio, but he could have been a small guy that had jumped to a next level, but a smaller guy. But he never worked on the character. And I'm like, why do you spend so much? It just drove me up a wall that he would spend so much time working on the attribute that, let's face it, in all honesty, is the single least important part about wrestling, is the actual wrestling. And people might hate that I say that, but the people that spend the money, the casual fans that make up the real box office, they're there for the entertainment. They're there for the showmanship. They're there to see Dusty with his cadence and his lisp and the flip flop and fly. And
they want to see that larger than life character, go in there and do what they do. And when you go back to Dusty Rhodes and you're talking about the fancy high flying moveset that the other guy had, when you think about Dusty Rhodes, you're thinking about classic, grab a body part, work the body part, and then just the magic stuff. Bionic elbow, dude. When he used it to start dropping bionic elbow, especially in the tag when heels are feeding in and he starts dropping that bionic elbow, and then he does that, I call it the snake charmer, where he rolls his hands together and rears back and delivers that trademark bionic elbow right in the guy's forehead, and the dude takes a big flat back, quick bump for him. Dude, and then he shakes his hips and moves backwards, and it just turns that charisma on, and the roof blows off the place.
And that's what's brings me to the other Dusty thing. His selling. He knew how to sell. When you were getting over, there was another guy that got over so big who did absolutely nothing, who has a move set of 2 moves, and he knows it. He'll tell you that. It's the Road Dogg. The Road Dogg has the shimmy, 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 and the knee drop, and the shimmy, shimmy, whatever, jabs.
Yeah.
No, the jab, I guess the shimmy, jabs, and a knee dropper or whatever. It's a very small move set. And he'll tell you, but because he learned from his dad, all he does is sell. He goes, all right, I'm going to hit my 2 moves and then cut me off and beat me up, get some heat. And people get behind it, It's simple. Not to put myself over, but one time when I was Johnny Polo, I was working Virgil, and I actually got people to chant. Of course, it was the other way, because if you have enough steam on you as a heel, you can also cause the same effect. But I actually got the people to chant, "Go Virgil, go," which I think probably was the first.
Right.
Nothing. I thought that might get a bigger pop, but it didn't. But apparently you never had to work with Virgil. So it's the selling. There's so many categories. You have to be a director, an actor, a producer, a writer. Well, you don't have to be a writer anymore because now they force you to read their scripts. A stuntman. There's so many hats you have to wear. But the least important hat is the wrestling hat, And so, but people don't get that, and they just want to, And not only that, but man, when I got into business, it was a mark of honor if you were considered light. That was a mark of honor,
Right.
Like now guys are like, I want to work strong style. I'm like, why? I want to be tough. Well, if you want to be tough, then go into UFC. But this is supposed to, after 10, 15 years, they're like, man, I wish I wouldn't have worked strong style. It's not about this. This business has nothing to do with toughness. I mean, you have to be tough to be in it because, just the beatings you take. But you don't have to add any extra beyond and above and beyond, infliction of stiffness, other than TV where, you need to lay it. You know what I mean? Or you need to at least be snug, but it just, to me, I find it, that people just don't get it, the business. I mean, and you can put it in and you can tell them, but it's that stupid saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him, sell, or you can't make him, work on his character.
And the thing about it is, and I think you could attest to this, I mean, the business, to your point, is physical in and of itself. You can't defy the laws of gravity and physics. So you're going to get picked up, you're going to fall down, you're going to get knocked down, you're going to take bumps. All that stuff's going to add up like interest over time, and it collects, and you have a volume of it by the time, your career's done. And then you fade off in the sunset, 5, 10, 15 years go by, you turn into an old dude, and you start feeling all that stuff. What I always like, and I worked snug or semi-stiff. No. Yeah, I kind of laid my stuff in, but I wasn't looking to strong-arm anybody or try to shoot on anybody because I didn't know how. But my point is, like when I go back and watch two of my favorite guys of all time, Flair's my favorite pro wrestler, and we'll get to yours, but I mean, when you look at Ricky Morton, you look at Bobby Eaton, everything they did looked great from a presentation standpoint. And when you locked up with them, it was a firm lockup. And all of a sudden they got a headlock on you, and it's like light as a feather, but it looks great on television. It looks great from the first row all the way up to row 100. And so that's why I always, and Ricky Morton, while I'm on talking about him, for being such a small guy, he didn't fly around. And, he didn't work like a cruiserweight. He worked a normal pro wrestling style. He worked main event style. And he sold his ass off. Ricky was one of the best sellers in the history of the business. And he also had great fire, and he would sell for anybody. But he was always going to get his stuff in. And a lot of people don't appreciate the magic of what superstar Bill Dundee did down there in the USWA. Bill was another guy who...
Ricky Morton. Let me tell you Ricky Morton thing real quick.
Oh, go ahead. I love Ricky Morton.
You probably heard this then. He was working Ole Anderson, and he hit Ole Anderson. Boom, 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 boom. Hit him with like 8, 9 punches, and Ole just kept shrugging him off. So then Ricky took a bump on his own, and for no reason, so he gets to the back, and Ole's like, "Why would you bump after hitting me 9 times?" He goes, "Somebody had to."
I've heard Ricky tell me that story, but and he made his point. Speaking of Ole and Arn, when you looked at Ole and Arn versus Arn and Tully, which combination was your favorite?
Here's the thing: is Ole and Arn is so far back for me that I don't remember it well enough. You know what I mean? So I can't really say. But
do you remember the Arn Tully stuff?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But it's weird. It's like my tastes have changed a lot too. As you get older, until you really learn main event style, you don't really get the business.
Okay, describe main event style.
Look. All right. Main event style is first of all, you have to have a character. I mean, how do you want me to, how much in depth do you want me to describe?
No, just, you're talking main event style, just briefly I know what main event style is, in my opinion.
I know. I'm saying, but you want me to go into in depth about, you got to have a character, you got to have the interviews, or just want me to explain it as basically you have to be able to make the people believe in you. And then you have to be able to get a strong set of heat so that the people have sympathy. Because if there's no sympathy, it doesn't matter. I mean, the whole match is worthless. It's like if guys are told when they get to the gorilla position that they got cut 3 minutes, they start cutting and pasting high spots. And I'm like, just cut out the shine. Shine is so unimportant because it's not necessary. But the heat's entirely necessary. So you have to get a strong set of heat. But then when it's time to bump and fly, when it's time for the comeback, you have to bump and fly. But Yeah, I mean, but you can't describe main event style without going into, the interviews and the characters and there's so much more to explain to it.
But also, I mean, to me, man, I think a main event style, it can, from a moveset or a work standpoint, can involve many things. But I think cruiserweight in Japan is more readily accepted as a main event style. But I think main event style in the United States is more straight up wrestling or brawling, as Lawler did so successfully down in in USWA. And I know you're a huge Jerry Lawler fan, just like I am. I consider him to be one of the greatest of all times.
Yeah, but to me that goes without saying. Like to me,
but that was main event style, telling the story.
I've railed against high spiketeers for years because if the match, if they're just going bing, bing, bing like pinballs and nobody's selling, then all it does, it doesn't leave any sympathy, so you don't build any drama. Without any drama, you don't have any emotional attachment. Without an emotional attachment, you're not going to spend your change. You're not going to spend the money out of your wallet because it's hard earned. Now you might want to see it as dressed in the card, but you're not going to spend the money like you would from Mike Tyson, like for Dusty Rhodes. And so if you're not going to, it's the match, the main event obviously is the match that makes you want to pull the money out of your pocket, but you have to be emotionally attached. Like I always try to use the analogy of Happy Days. Like, to me, Richie Cunningham was actually the main event on it. Everybody thought it was Fonzie because he was all cool and stuff, or kind of like Kramer was on Seinfeld.
Right.
But once Richie left the show, tanked. The show basically once Richie left the show tanked in a couple years. But the ratings dropped precipitously, like right off the bat.
Yeah, because he was the white meat babyface.
The emotional glue. Yeah, he was the emotional glue that held the show together. Even though Fonzie was the glitz and the glamour, he was, and that's what made Dusty so good. Was Dusty was the glitz and the glamour, but because he sold, he gave you the emotional drama that made you cry. You know what I mean? It made you want to believe. It made you want to see him make that comeback. Same thing with Ricky Morton. The stories of him making girls cry aren't stories. I mean, they're not made up. They're not fiction. They're true. I mean, and until you've actually felt that, it's like until you've. I can give you that on a really, really minor scale. It's pretty funny. So I only like my first year in the business. Not that I was working main event style. I was working jabroni style. But I was working with Don Bass in Memphis. And, they have those, instead of a guardrail, they have stanchions and like the rope, but it's really more like a string.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Around the stanchions. So he starts to put the string around my neck to choke me. And some fan grabs him to pull him off of me. So leave him alone. And then, of course, that makes him pull tighter and starts choking me out. So the lady's trying to help me, ends up choking me out just about, which isn't main event style by any stretch of the imagination. But the point being is that somehow what I was doing was making her emotional. Either she was somebody with mental difficulties, or she had gotten so emotionally involved in the match that she felt the need to actually intercede on my behalf. And that's the thing is, with a match where the moves are just moves and moves and moves and moves, and nobody's slowing down, which also I think is because of a lack of poise and a lack of grace in the ring. Like, you ever see when a guy will go to put his hands up in the air, like, yay, like, say, babyface or a heel. Babyface hits a big move and puts his arms up in the air, like, yay, for the big pop.
Right.
But as he's doing it, he starts walking around. Not like how you walk around when you're hitting your thing, because you're doing that because you're showing off to all the corners, right? But when you're ready to hit your pose, you hit your pose to one side, boom.
Right.
Then you hit it to another side. But you watch guys with no grace and no poise, and as they raise their arms, as soon as they get their arms up, they'll turn to the other side, and just as the people are about to react, they'll turn to another side. And then just as they're about to react, because they don't know if the people are going to react properly, they don't know if the people are going to react good, bad, or worse with no reaction. So that way, they can't be hung out to dry because they never really stop for the pop. So in their mind, they don't put themselves out, and so they're not, they don't have to feel self-conscious. And that's part of the problem. is if you're doing moves nonstop. And that's one of the things I hated about Benoit was when he was on offense, he was too self-conscious. I know I'm going to get a lot of crap for this, but I think I worked a lot with Benoit. And to me, he was an amazing seller, and the match where they put the title on him, like I actually saw that because I was at a paid appearance. And I was like, man, the way the match built, I go, if they're not putting the belt on him, they should call the audible and put it on him anyway. And then they put it on him anyhow, so it worked out perfect. But but offensively, he could never stop. He had to keep chopping and chopping and chopping and chopping. Luckily, he was the only one doing it, so it was okay. So it didn't seem. But if there was another couple guys doing the same thing that was over like he was, then all of a sudden you would see the flaws in it because he never gave you a chance to sell. He never gave it. If you don't get a chance to sell, then how am I going to commit to the act of drama? And then he would never have I think he felt a lot of self-conscious because, whenever he would, pose half the time, or at least further back in his career, he would do the thing I was just talking about. And not that he wasn't an amazing athlete, and not that he was amazing in Japan, and not that he wasn't a double murderer. So you have to take that into account too. But the whole thing is that, to me, I hated the fact that he would never let me sit because he was too self-conscious to gloat to the crowd, or to play what he did to the crowd, So he would chop me in the corner and chop me, and I'd just have to drop to my knees and powder. And then figure I'd get a breather, but no, there he was, right behind me, spin me around, chop, chop, chop. So, I made the most of it. But to me, and I know from what I've read, I know you were a big fan of working with him, so I'm curious to see your feedback. So that's why I'm kind of filibustering here.
No, you just got to but that's first of all, I loved working with Chris Benoit, and I was a huge fan. Especially, I thought his work really translated probably better in Japan than in the States. Mm-hmm. I thought he kind of outworked himself. And he worked too fast. And, working too fast normally is a sign of someone that is really green in the business. But Chris was a hell of a hand that could work anywhere in the world. He just liked to work fast. But when you do something to try to elicit a response, when you get that response, you respond accordingly. So if you knock somebody down, let that register that you've knocked somebody down because they've gone down for you. And then, you can pace around. There's times to hit the gas pedal. There's times to pull off, but you got to let people breathe in and grab hold of the fact that, hey, this guy's in trouble. And if you never stop chopping wood, you don't have the chance for the audience to get emotionally involved like they want to. So I'm not going to sit here and pick apart his work because he was premier, but Chris Benoit, I think, would have been even better than he was had he slowed down and let those moments breathe. And again, he's not here with us anymore, but, I'm just saying that would be my only critique of his work: slow down and let the other guy, to your point, sell. So let me, now that I've put the downside on him, as a Japan style, it was outstanding. And frankly, because he looked the part, he was believable in the part, it was okay because it worked in the sense that you have to have different things on the card. You always have to have different things on the card. So, that's why I said because there was only him, and I tried to tell guys that would work like him afterwards, I'd say, don't be like him. They go, but I want to be like Benoit. I'm like, only Benoit is going to be Benoit because he was missing a tooth. He had the look. He had the build. He was like a machine, and you believed in him. Oh yeah, he was a machine. He was a Wolverine. But the thing about it is, I was over in Japan for 3 weeks. And it was me, Arn Anderson, Ron Simmons, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, a couple of other guys, and me and Arn were about to go crazy because we were stateside guys, so we were drinking tons of beer. And all of a sudden, you go out there and you watch Chris work with either Jushin Thunder Liger or Malenko or Eddie, and they would just rip the place apart for like 20 solid minutes of badass wrestling and action and high spots, and you're sitting there thinking, dude, this is only my second tour of Japan. How do you follow that? And you know how you follow it?
Right.
You just go out there and you do your own thing, because that's what they do, and you can't beat them at it. So you don't try to up your game to match them, because you can't. So you stick to your same game plan. You do the same Stone Cold stuff, or Stunning Steve, whatever I was back in. You do your same stuff. But I tell you what, when you first go over there, it was intimidating, because you think, I got to do what these guys are doing. No, you don't. You do what you brought to the dance, and what brought you there in the first place. You wrestle your own game.
And I think the reason he kept getting faster and faster was because he got more and more self-conscious, and he couldn't stop because he didn't know how to stop. Because once you stop, all eyes are on you. And once all eyes are on you, you got to have something to do with yourself. Like I and I'd swing my hair out of my face, and it would flop back in, so I'd push it aside with my hand, and I'd snort my nose, and I'd look around like I was thinking. But while I'm
that's that creative process that you're creating time for the audience to buy in and take heed to the fact of the damage that you've just done. You're killing time, but you're doing it in a creative fashion.
Yeah, you have to build time and space. It's like trying to teach guys, like, okay, when I bump you on the comeback, you need to bump and roll away from me and feed back in. So when you're coming in, there's distance between us. So something more could potentially happen. It's like, I hate the fact that guys always reverse. Like every time somebody gets shot off the ropes, there's always a reversal. Man, back in the day, and not to sound like Vern Gagne, but back in the day, a reversal was a high spot. Because if you think about it, you shoot the guy off because you're in control. You're shooting him off because you're in control. He reverses it. You hit the ropes. All of a sudden, usually 9 times out of 10, the guy in the middle does the offensive maneuver. So all of a sudden, he's gotten a hook spot out of it. And so but what happened is guys just reverse to make it more convoluted and make it more what they think is quotation marks interesting. Right. But it's not. It just craps up. It just craps it up. And you'll never see me. Well, of course, I don't really work anymore, but you never really saw me reverse a guy and shoot a guy off and have him reverse, unless I had a plan that was part of the drama, not just to be for high spot's sake, not just to make it, a mixed up, bag of nuts.
Old Man Winter is out there laying the smack down with all the snow, ice, and freezing rain this season. So what sense does it make for you to get in your car and brave the elements just to get all your office supplies in order when you can find them all in one place? The geniuses at Zorro.com figured out how to make your life easier by having all your office supplies in one easy-to-access location. Zorro.com, spelled Z-O-R-O, is where you'll find everything you need for businesses of any size and almost any industry. Electrical, plumbing, contracting, manufacturing, don't sweat it because Zorro has you covered. Zorro.com has tools and equipment, safety and office supplies, cleaning items, and more from brands you know and trust, such as Stanley, 3M, Milwaukee, Schneider, and Rubbermaid, just to name a few. Zorro.com offers amazing customer service from real people based in the U.S., and you'll appreciate the fast, free shipping on orders of $50 or more. Just for listeners of the Steve Austin Show, visit Zorro.com/Austin to sign up for Z-Mill and get 15% off your first order. Again, that's Zorro.com/Austin for 15% off your first order. Zorro.com/Austin. Get it all in one place.
Hey, Jordan here. I know a lot of you create your own podcasts, and a lot of you already have one like me. I obviously love what I do. It's taken a lot of hard work to get to this point of success. You shouldn't have to pay fees for platform hosting, distribution, analytics, or fees to create a podcast. You need to be able to focus on producing the best show possible. Now, PodcastOne, that's the network I'm on, they have Launchpad Digital Media, or Launchpad DM for short. So it's free, includes unlimited hosting, full control of distribution. You have access to a full dashboard with analytics. Again, totally free. You own everything, by the way. You own your content, you own your subscribers, no tricky stuff there. And you get your own show page on launchpaddm.com for people to listen to and subscribe to your show. It's the only hosting platform brought to you by the leading network, PodcastOne. PodcastOne will promote the site, drive people to discover your podcast, and if your show grows, You could even be invited to join PodcastOne's all-star roster, which includes people like Adam Carolla, Caitlin Bristow, Shaq, Lady Gang, and of course me, Jordan Harbinger. I'm there too. You also get access to their production and sales support. So with all this completely free, don't use other hosting platforms. Why would you need to? Learn more or sign up now at launchpaddm.com. And don't forget to check out The Jordan Harbinger Show.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on Podcast One.
Let's shift gears to the work that Shawn Michaels was doing. I consider Shawn to be, I think he's the greatest in-ring performer I've ever seen, just from a standpoint of being mechanically inclined to do everything, present it well, not kill anybody, never botch anything. So I think he's that good. But back in the day, you know, it's funny when you watch pro sports.
Did you work him a lot? When
I first went to WWF, you know, I was a ringmaster. Man, I wrestled Shawn, 3-4 nights a week for, you know, a couple months.
I'm saying, but once you were Stone Cold.
No, not as much, because, you know, that's when he took time off. But my point is, you know, people, you're talking about for the sake of the high spot. You know, when I thought about Shawn Michaels back in the day, you know, I wouldn't give him any credit. I'd say, high spot artist. Well,
but he wasn't, though.
No, well, I know, that's what I'm saying. My point is, as soon as you got in a ring with him, and you're like, well, that was the defensive side of me being a competitor and not wanting to put the guy over. But as soon as you lock up with him, it's like, and you go through 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes with him and do it for a couple of months, you're like, Jesus Christ, this is one of the baddest dudes I've ever worked with in my life. And so then you give him the respect after night one. But I wouldn't, because I was stuck on, he's a high spot artist, because he was doing these awesome sequences, but he would also sell as well. So, but it took actually working with him in person for me to reverse my thoughts and think, hey man, this dude's one of the best of all time.
Yeah, he's an unbelievable athlete. Me and Marty used to be really close as partner, and I've always, as you know, tend to open my mouth and be kind of say what shouldn't be said, you know, because it's just rude, you know. So, you know, so it's none of my business. And, you know, I mean, me and Shawn were friends, but I mean, we got along anyway. And, but me and Marty were good friends. But I asked Shawn one day, I go, you're so freaking talented. How come when it's a match and you're super beat up and the guy shoots you off, you don't run the ropes like you're beat up? You run them like you're fresh as a daisy. And he goes, I don't want the boys in the back to think I'm blown up. And I believed it. Yeah, I believe that's what he meant too. I don't think he was BSing. But it's funny though, you know. But yeah, he's amazing. But still, to me, the best worker of all time was the King, was Lawler. And of course, you're going to have to go back 10. I don't even know how long you go back before to see real Lawler stuff. But Lawler was amazing. I mean, he was mind-bogglingly amazing. And not only that, but he did some stuff like, we talked about this last week or whatever, we were on the phone, but when Joe LeDuc picked them up, like they had this table that was like an iron table, you know, like you couldn't break it to save your life. You know, it wasn't going to break, and it was probably like 4 feet high, because Lance Russell and Dave Brown would stand at it during the Memphis house shows, and it was probably a solid 10 feet away from the ring, and Joe LeDuc and Lawler obviously agreed to the spot. Joe LeDuc picks him up over his head like a press slam and throws him into the table. I mean, that was seriously a badass spot before there even were badass spots like that, you know. But I mean, not just to show one side of him that you would never even think of the King doing, but his work was so extraordinary. His ability to get over, and just his cleverness. Like he, one time he was working Razor Ramon, and Ramon would always throw the toothpick at the guy. So he throws the toothpick at the King. The King all of a sudden goes down like he's been shot. They come over, the referee comes over, Razor comes over to see what's going on. The King's holding the toothpick in his eye, like the toothpick went right in his eye. And what a brilliant way to get 4 minutes out of 4 or 5 minutes out of it. Instead of having a 4 or 5 minute match, which you got to have, you know, where nobody really gets over because it's probably going to be a finish where nobody, it's disputed, a disputed finish, or 50-50 booking. So what a way to get yourself over to get the match over. It's why Jake Roberts was one of the only guys I could watch do squash matches once I got older, because his squash matches were interesting. I mean, he actually would take a jobber and go 5, 6, 7 minutes, and it'd be actually interesting to watch. And, which is ridiculous because, well, 2 points about that. One is, I used to hate that guys that should have no business going more than 2 minutes, they would put them out there 10 minutes, just random, willy-nilly, it didn't matter. And then guys that could really go and have an interesting match with a jobber, they would have to go 2 minutes. I mean, there wasn't any rhyme or reason to who got picked, as opposed to looking at it and going, this guy can have a match with him, this guy can't. So this is the one that will go longer. This one won't. And finally, we were at Jake's like I'm a big fan of Jake. He's a big hero of mine. And his movie's fantastic. Anybody that's listening should see it. A couple of years ago, I was on an indie show in Florida, me and Steve Carino, and Carino's a hell of a worker, too. Really no build whatsoever, but a hell of a worker. So Jake has a match with some local job guy, because just they wanted to have Jake on the show and DDT somebody. But, more than just having them walk into the show and just DDT the guy, Jake decided he put on a wrestling clinic. Must have went 10, 15 minutes with this guy. Literally gave him one punch was the guy's comeback. And me and Carino just sat there with our jaws hanging on the floor. We were so mesmerized by how brilliant the work was. I mean, like, the amount of gaga he did, because there's good gaga and there's bad gaga. It's like mic work, now everybody, at least for the longest time, every match got on the microphone. Just like every match got a valet. There's an art form to having a valet. There's an art form to talking on the mic. If your promo is my gauge is this: if the guy in the front row could cut the same promo, then it's not a very good promo. Right? I mean, if you're just going to say, "Let me tell you, when I'm coming to get you, I'm going to kick your butt," blah blah blah. That's not a good promo. Jake was able to make the match interesting, doing gaga and just stuff that was so intriguing, and taking his time with the guy, like, and then I can't even remember what he did, but I don't think anybody else in the business could have done it.
I love asking you questions and then just the way you just go off on a tirade. I love it. But so when you say gaga, good gaga, bad gaga, now you've got to define to my listeners what gaga is.
Well, she's a singer now. She's starring on American Horror Story. No, the gaga is what you do. It's the Shakespeare.
Yes.
It's what you do between moves.
Correct.
It's
the filler.
It's the filler, but it's more than just.
It's the mannerisms. It's the actions.
But let me just say, but filler sounds like it's extraneous.
Right.
It's not. That's why I hate using that word. But it's like, okay, how long can you take from, like, if you bumped a guy, and then how long can you take? Not that you want to take forever, but you don't want to just immediately pick them up and chop wood. So now you got to put it, like we talked about earlier, you got to put in a little effort. But if every time you bump them or whatever, and then you hit your pose to the crowd, well, that's going to get old too. So you have to think of other things besides hitting your pose, besides, standing around with your thumb up your butt, arguing with the ref, which one of my other pet peeves is when people touch the ref. I think if you have to touch the ref in any way, it's just a complete, because if the ref has no control, I mean, if you get, like, guys in indie shows will just walk up, grab the ref, hey, look over there in a tag match, and then, so they can do, double team them behind the ref's back.
Well, that's Bush League stuff. Stick to the gaga, because gaga's a two-way street, and with respect to buying time. So you and me are working. I give you the big bump.
We never work.
I know, and it's ridiculous. But so, okay, we're working now. I give you the big bump. Okay, I want to buy a little time creatively. I might adjust my knee brace. I might look at the front row. I might react to someone who said something. Then, by the same token, you know what time it is. You're going to buy time as well. I mean, you might have the big arch. You might have the big arch in your back. You might roll over for me. I might go to pick you up, and if you move away from me, I mean, you're doing your thing, but we're both creating space and time before the next thing that we're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, you may walk over. I used to do this a lot. I'd walk over to the guy and I'd grab him by the hair. and then I'd pause some more and milk it. You know, because now it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this is subconscious going on, but the people are like, oh, he's that close. If only the guy could hit him. You know, and now, and the guy's on 2 knees. Now maybe the guy comes to 1 knee. I'm still standing there because I'm still just kind of surveying the situation, and all of a sudden it builds up drama. Well, another thing I hate, another pet peeve, is when guys will, like, let's say I slam you. Well, yeah, I'm never slamming anybody. I don't think I've slammed anybody in 25 years.
No, you just slammed me.
So I slam you, and then and you know the next spot is me shooting you off the ropes. Well, most guys, 90% of the business, are going to lay there in the center and wait for me to pick them up and back them into the ropes. You're going to, because you know how to work, you're going to start making your way to the ropes like you're trying to get away from me and clear the cobwebs.
Right.
And then as you're climbing the ropes, as you finally get to your feet, it's too late. I'm there and I shoot you off. That way I never have to throw a punch that's just going to be shook off anyway, you know, or because you're expecting me to shoot you off. So if I throw a punch, you're like, oh, crap, I was expecting to be shot off. I'll just shake it off and I'm ready to go. You know, or in guys, I hate when guys start throwing 5 punches while the guy's at the ropes. Because people sitting on the edge of their seats is because it's real. You know, when people are excited, they sit on the edge of their seat. And when they're not excited, they slunch back into their seat. And so if you're on the edge of your seat watching, you're like, oh, yes, he's going to shoot them off. Something big is going to happen. Or at least something potentially big is going to happen. And that's what so much of this is potential. And so, you know, it's like quantum physics. You know, it's all about potential. So you're sitting there, and then all of a sudden the guy punches him once, punches him twice, punches him 3 times. Now the fan slid back into his seat, and now he's leaning back against his chair, as opposed to being sitting on the edge of his seat like he just was.
Yeah, because it wasn't spontaneous. Now, on the other hand, had I slumped over to the ropes and maybe if you were giving me a blind feed and we're going to jam in and maybe you were actually jacking with the crowd a frog's hair, and then when you turned in to reach for my arm, if I fired back 3 times and catch your ass and get you rocking, if you've had a little steam on me, bam, we got the people up. Boom, I go to shoot you in. If I go for the backdrop, whether you kick me or if it's the dreaded reversal, you know, you catch me with an elbow at the ropes, boom, I go down, back to your shenanigans.
The reversal's okay. And a reversal, that's
correct.
Okay then, because that makes sense. That is telling a story that you had the advantage, you shot me off, but I had enough wherewithal because you only were able to hit me with 3 punches, and I had been dominating you long enough that when I reverse it, that's okay because it meant something.
It meant something and it made sense.
Yeah.
What did you like so much about Lawler's work? Because I'm a huge Lawler fan, and I don't feel enough people give him credit for his work because you and I are 50 and 51 years old, so a lot of people didn't see Lawler work in his prime. They saw Lawler when he got to WWE, and he can still work his ass off to this day, but they know him more for his commentary work and how quick-witted he is on a stick. Lawler cut some of the best promos in the history of the business. And again, to your point, he was one of the greatest workers. But when you watch Lawler's work, everything made sense, no wasted motion, very economic, sold his ass off, tons of fire when it came time for fire. And when you look at his style, I mean, he wrestled a little bit, but he really was more of a stand-up brawler in a 6'1", 6'2", 215-pound body, and he drew money.
Yeah, absolutely. He drew tons of money. Nothing but money. Nothing but dollars. Greenbacks. Dead presidents.
But, dude, you can bring that style back, and that style can still make money because it makes sense. And he was serious.
And one thing that I really loved was, and this is why I hate the fact that on indie shows everybody gets to talk on the mic, because guys don't know when enough's enough. They don't know, you know, like the king knows when it's time to work, when it's time to talk, when it's time to gaga, when it's time to do whatever, because there's so many different little things that need to be done in a match or can be done, and you can't dwell on one forever at the expense of the others. You know, it's like I wish people were able to work in a territory, because I worked for 2 years in Portland where we worked literally no less than 6 nights a week and sometimes 7. And we worked maybe 3 or 4 or 5 nights a week, you know, the 2 years I was there. But they were made up by more than enough 7 nights a week. But I learned to listen to a crowd, you know, and when a crowd was cheering, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're totally behind you. It could mean like, okay, we're cheering because we're supposed to cheer. It could, it's like aloha. Aloha means like 16 different things, in Hawaiian. It could mean hello, it could mean goodbye, it could mean, screw you, it could mean I'm hungry, or I don't know. I don't really speak Hawaiian, so I don't know. But it can mean a lot of things. And so does an audience's clapping. Guys will always think, well, as long as they're responding, that means I can keep going. Well, it doesn't, because sometimes they're just doing it to be nice, and you have to be able to hear that. And you think to yourself, how the hell can you possibly hear that? And I don't know, but I learned because I got to work with some great veterans. I got to work with the grappler basically and pick his brain every night for 2 years in Portland, who at 19 or 20, he was on top for watch. And he actually beat Andre and somebody else in the same it was a handicap match or something, and he actually watched like Andre the Giant and somebody else, and for Watts to put that kind of heat on a guy who was only 5'10", 240. That's saying something, you know what I mean?
And when you're talking about the grappler, you're talking about the man named Len Denton. And so this guy was one of the veterinaires that you got a chance to pick. Me, on the other hand, I didn't get a guy who had the reputation that Len Denton had. But, one of the guys that I gravitated towards was Gorgeous Gary Young, who was an outstanding mechanic and a hell of a damn worker. He just never got a big break. But, man, that dude was smart. And I'd go down the road and pick his brain. But I'm going back to you here. Gary, and along with Chris Adams, and Danny Davis down there in Tennessee and USWA, and it started helping me learn to listen to the crowd. And then once I got a taste of listening to that crowd, then I was like, okay, now I get it, because, I'm trying to control these people. And if you're going to be successful, you must. So how long did it take for you to listen to the people and then be able to read them and make heads or tails of the psychology of the business and go from 101 to the multifaceted level, which is money?
Well, I learned how to listen to the people in Portland. I think by the time I got to ECW, I knew how to draw money. Although I did draw some money in Portland, but I still wasn't at that level yet. I know I wasn't at that level yet, but I was over enough that I put some asses in some seats. They weren't actually at the arena; they were at the local But no, I think I finally put most of it together by the time I got to ECW. But listening to that crowd, it's so. If I tried to explain, I couldn't. I don't think I could explain how you can hear so many different things in a crowd noise, even though to anybody else it's going to sound just like noise. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah, the interesting thing to me is getting the feedback, processing it, and then making a decision to go elsewhere. And then on the fly say, oh, no, man, here's a good spot for the heat. Or, man, piss on the heat. Let's fire this thing up for a little bit of a comeback. And, just reading the crowd, listening to the crowd. And to me, that was like, man, that was the part of the match that really got me high, was, being able to have that relationship with the crowd, respond accordingly, and nail it. And sometimes, even as a veteran, you can jack it up and lose it. And sometimes I'll never forget working at the Sky Dome in Toronto. It was a real big building. And man, when the bottom fell out of that place, you really felt bad because you just couldn't get them back again. And it's a horrible feeling when you lose a crowd. But, most of the time, when you're on top, you're batting 900. You got to be able to do it almost every single time you went out. Yeah. You said ECW. Now, this is coming on the heels of your WWF and your WCW run, right? Because
when I was in WWF, I was Johnny Polo, and I worked in the office. I had an office across from Pat and Bruce, in the Titan Tower on the 4th floor. And then I went to WCW, and that's when we all rode together. Then I went back to Memphis, like the Hotel California. You could check out, but you can't ever leave. And then I went to New York, and then I went to ECW. But by then I kind of put the pieces all together. I hadn't completely put the pieces together, and maybe you never put the pieces completely together.
Right. Interesting.
Because your opinion's going to change. Like I remember, at first the Piper Greg Valentine dog collar match. I think the first time I saw it, I was like, I'm not so impressed, because there weren't a lot of high spots and stuff, and that's what I liked when I was younger. and then I got impressed with it. And then I got to the point in my career where I was like, everything had to be like, I wanted to be smooth, Brad Armstrong smooth.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so then I didn't like it again. But by the time I got to ECW, I was like, man, this is what a match. You know
right.
what I mean? I never told you this. I can tell you this. When we used to ride together, me and Pillman knew we were too small at ECW. So, we figured if we could be a tag team, then we could, have a good career longevity. And you obviously wanted to stay a single, and so that's what we talk about. And then they end up making you and Pillman a tag team, and then I got, let go like a couple months later. And but I remember, maybe it wasn't this early, but me and Pillman had some really, really, it was either a pay-per-view or something where we had like this stellar match, and everybody put it over, man. It was like, wow, it was a great match. And then the next day it was like a TV taping, and you and Pillman had like a better match by far, by like light years ahead. And I was like, man, it's just depressing.
Yeah, that was the thing about it back then. Riding around, I wanted to be a singles wrestler my entire career because, as a tag, you got to depend on another guy. If he goes down with an injury or whatever, then you're screwed because you figure in as a tag team.
Share the glory.
Yeah.
Share the glory.
Yeah, and almost split the paycheck sometimes. But anyway, so they end up putting me and Brian together, and then all of a sudden it was like, wow, because I love tag team wrestling. But I wanted to be a singles wrestler. But all of a sudden you start wrestling. When you got 4 guys out there and 6-mans, they get a little convoluted. There can be good 6-man matches, but a pure 4-man tag with a great referee, all the pieces out there that you can mess with and, pull that referee, with good heels and manipulate things, blind tags, just all the different things you can do. That's when I really fell in love with tag team wrestling was after, teaming up with Brian. And of course, he came up with the idea of the gold chains, all the BS. But my point is, that's when I fell in love with tag team wrestling. And as a spectator today, it's just hard to find, great tag team wrestling like there was so many years ago when there was territories and established teams who made their whole careers out of being a team. So it would only stand to reason. I'm not knocking today's current tag teams. I'm just saying there's no way you can compare them to guys that spent their whole career in a tag team.
I think there's 2 reasons for that. I think it's actually all based off of one reason is that, WWE's always seen a tag match as 4th or 5th in the top, so they were never going to push them as main eventers. So the best talent was never going to go into a tag situation. Whereas in the South, tag match, I'm doing cardio now, so I may be out of breath. If I am, I'll stop doing cardio. Tag teams were revered, and they were used as main eventers. Some of the biggest drawing houses ever, like in the Carolinas, were tag team matches. So it's just a different atmosphere, but I concur with you. I think there's I'd much rather be a single, but there's on a regular basis, to me, in a perfect world, I'd be a single on TV, and I'd work tags on the road.
Yeah.
And look, the tags, there's such a higher level of creativity in some ways because there's more people. But also, I'm lazy. So that kind of suits me personally, so...
For all of you out there looking for ways to save some cash this holiday season, why not look at your car insurance? With Geico, it will take you only 15 minutes to save 15% or more on car insurance. Geico has been offering great rates and great service for over 75 years. And anytime you need help, you can speak to one of their trained specialists 24/7. Go to geico.com and start saving cash. Extra money in your pocket? It may just be the most rewarding thing you do today. All right, everybody, give me the go-home cue. It's time to wrap up this podcast and ride off in the sunset. If you want to reach me here on the podcast, send an email to questions@steveaustonshow.com. Hey, man, I'm proud to announce that Broken Skull IPA from El Segundo Brewing Company and myself will be hitting the shelves in the Bay Area and Sacramento this week, so be on the lookout. Go to the El Segundo Brewing Company interactive website and check out where you can buy Broken Skull IPA at a location near you. This week, coming to the Bay Area and Sacramento area, and also still hitting the East Coast, New Jersey, New York, and Boston, Massachusetts area. Check the interactive map And for 2020, we're looking at coming to 6 or 8 more states. The beer has been a tremendous success, and I thank you very much for all of your support that you've shown us. Again, check out the website, elsegundobrewing.com, to find out where we're at so you can check out the best IPA in America, and that's the bottom line. Hey, man, Christmas is just a few days away. King of Attitude shirts are available at Pro Wrestling Tees store and also Broken Skull Ranch apparel. ProWrestlingTees.com/Steve Austin for those shirts. What a great stocking stuffer. If you're looking to either get the Cold Steel Broken Skull knife or the Working Man's knife, go to my Amazon store, Amazon.com/shop/Steve Austin. They got the best price on both knives. I want to say one more special thank you to all the fine sponsors of the Steve Austin Show, especially Geico and BetOnline.ag. That's how I'm able to do this podcast for you twice a week for free. I also want to take a moment as we wrap up 2019 to say thank you to all the sponsors I've had this past year for keeping the Steve Austin Show free and in your earbuds every week without fail. You guys are badass. Please support our sponsors because they support us. If you need more info, check out the show description to this episode for details. Folks, if you find me out in the woods, I'll proudly be riding a Kawasaki, and that's the bottom line. Folks, when you see me in the woods, I will proudly be riding a Kawasaki, and that's the bottom line. Until next time, my name is Steve Austin, and I will catch your ass down the road.
Thank you for joining us for another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. For more Steve Austin Show, go to PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.